Y'all get ready?
Yes, you get ready.
If you want the latest news in the streets, join us and tune in for the tea. Breaking news with integrity. So tell your friends and your family. It's the Lovelyti TV show, bringing you good tea and good vibes. It's the Lovelyti TV show. Be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Hey Tisippers, I hope you guys are doing good today. Make sure y'all have y'all's teacups ready because this tea is what? Piping hot. So today in our mini deep dive, we're going to talk about more nostalgia and what happened to all the black shows that we grew up loving in the 90s and the 2000s. I'm going to do a complete breakdown of what happened to those shows, how they were built on our backs, only for us to be discarded. We're going to talk about how the entire television networks were built on black culture, built on black talent, and built on black viewers. Then once they got rich and they got powerful and got established, they basically booted us out the door. I'm talking about Fox, I'm talking about the WB and UPN. They strategically use black audiences, families, and things like that as their foundation to get the ratings, to get advertisers, to get cultural relevance. And then once they got everything they needed, they slowly started rebranding, replacing, and erasing us from television. And the craziest part is we didn't realize it when it was happening in real time, but looking back on it, I see the game. This wasn't an accident, this was straight up strategy, and I'm going to go ahead and break everything down, so grab y'all's teacups. So let's start from the beginning, because context is everything. When Fox launched in 1986, it was a joke. Literally, people in the industry didn't even consider it a real network. It had a handful of stations, no credibility, and the industry literally called it that network with the cartoon show, meaning The Simpsons, and not much else. There was also the Tracy Ullman show. I remember watching that in like second grade, but nobody talked about Fox like that. It wasn't like ABC, NBC, or CBS. Those stations locked up the television landscape for over a decade. They had an audience, they had advertisers, they were prestigious, and Fox was none of that. So what do you do when you have nothing? You go out and you find an audience that nobody else is paying attention to. And that's what Fox did, okay? This is where the black folks come in at. Network executives did research, and what they found was something that had been sitting right in plain sight. African American viewers were watching television at disproportionately higher rates than any other group in the country. They were loyal, they were consistent, and that was the key. They were basically being ignored by the big three, ABC, CBS, and NBC. They were not making any programming at the time that really catered to black audiences. They were not centering black stories, black families, or black talent in a meaningful way. Fox saw an opening, and honey, they took it, okay? And their strategy was not subtle. Academic researcher Crystal Brent Zook literally wrote an entire book called Colored by Fox, The Fox Network and the Revolution in Black Television. She laid it out clearly. Fox executives deliberately positioned themselves as urban to establish the network's reputation as hip, different, and culturally relevant. That was the goal, not representation, not inclusion, not equity. It was branding. Black culture was the vehicle. Now, the biggest show that put Fox on the map was In Living Color. In 1989, Fox executives approached Keenen Ivory Wayans after his success in the film I'm Gonna Get You Sucker. They gave him an opportunity that nobody else in the mainstream television was giving. A sketch comedy show with a predominantly black cast, created and ran by a black man. Wayans wanted to do what Saturday Night Live had been doing for years. Sharp, culturally relevant sketch comedy, but with black people at the center, speaking directly to the black experience. He wanted to take chances. He wanted to be raw and funny in a way that the mainstream television had never allowed black artists to be, and Fox agreed. They agreed to everything. Then they kind of started getting a little bit nervous, okay? They shot the pilot, which included Men on Film, Homeboy Shopping Network, and the sketch about Louis Farrakhan. Keenen Ivory Wayans later recalled what happened. They showed the pilot to Fox executives, and in his words, they got nervous. The show sat on the shelf for 6 months. The network had specifically gone looking for a black creator to build their identity. Now they were too scared to air what that black creator had made. It only came off the shelf because a producer named Tamara Rowett quietly passed a copy of the pilot to a journalist at Details magazine who wrote about why this incredible show isn't being picked up. Rowlett faxed the article to Fox executives, and they finally gave the green light. In Living Color premiered April 15th, 1990, and it was an immediate smash. Its first two seasons pulled in a 10-point Nielsen rating. It won the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Variety, Music, or Comedy Series in its very first year. Then came the moment that changed everything, not just for Fox, but for the entire history of the Super Bowl halftime show. When I tell y'all, y'all had to be there. I remember when In Living Color premiered. I had to be like in third grade at the time. But I remember everybody talking about it, everybody sitting around the television. And, it was just so fun to watch. You saw people who looked like you. We would mimic, Kim Wayans and Keenan Ivory Wayans. We would do our own little comedy skits on the back porch. So this show really shaped us as children. Now, during the 1992 Super Bowl, Fox made a bold and audacious move. They aired a live episode of In Living Color as counter-programming to the halftime show on CBS. 20 million people flipped the channel, okay, choosing to watch In Living Color over the halftime Super Bowl show. The NFL was so embarrassed and so impressed that they completely overhauled their halftime strategy. The very next year, in 1993, Michael Jackson performed at the Super Bowl halftime show. The modern Super Bowl halftime shows, we know it. You can trace it directly back to the black sketch comedy show on Fox. So back in the day, there were no halftime performances. They just, expected people to get away from the TV, have a bathroom break, go get some sandwiches, refill your beer, but to keep, the station on. But people realized that In Living Color was on at the same time. So when it went to halftime, over 20 million people flipped the channel. So then at that point, they knew, okay, wow, Fox definitely has some power. There's definitely something going on over there at Fox. So then, because they were embarrassed, they went and got Michael Jackson to perform the very next year. And of course, we didn't change to Living Color the next year because we all wanted to see Michael Jackson. And he killed the very first ever Super Bowl performance. Let's talk about the careers that were also launched from that show. Jim Carrey, Jamie Foxx, Jennifer Lopez, Carrie Ann Mbana, Rosie Perez. She was a choreographer for the Fly Girls. David Allen Greer, Tommy Davidson, Damon Wayans, Kim, Sean, and Marlon Wayans. The show was essentially a talent factory for an entire generation of entertainers. And it wasn't just launching careers, it was giving Fox credibility, the attention, and the culture that it desperately needed to compete with the big boys. But here's what was already happening underneath the surface. Even during those golden years, Keenan Ivory Wayans began clashing with Fox almost immediately over creative control. The network started censoring their content. They began rerunning early episodes without consulting him. Wayans was afraid, and rightfully so, that Fox was going to decrease the syndication value of In Living Color by controlling what he'd made. He stopped appearing in the sketches in 1992. After the end of the third season, by season 4, he left the show completely. The Wayans family followed. Without them, the show was never the same. It was finally canceled in 1994. Fox needed black creativity, gave a black creator the freedom, got famous off of it, then started controlling and constraining that creator until the relationship fell apart. Different era, different show, same damn story every single time. So while In Living Color was making waves, Fox was stacking their primetime lineup with more black shows. It felt like something real was happening. There was The Rock, which was my show. I loved The Rock. And when they were doing their acting, they were acting live in front of the audience. This was not pre-rehearsed. They could not make any mistakes. This is how dedicated the actors on The Rock show were to their craft. Nobody had seen anything like that on television, so it drew in a lot of people just because it was filmed live.
Okay. I guess he's basically a good kid. All those kids are good kids. Just need a little guidance. Pop, get an ambulance, get an ambulance. More rock after this.
They had a lot of good hitting, heartfelt topics that really resonated with the black community. I love rock. It premiered in 1991 and it starred Charles S. Dutton as a Baltimore garbage collector. Now, Rock wasn't like Martin. It wasn't buffoonery and coonery, okay? It was serious and dramatic. It was a culturally grounded television show. The 4 principal cast members were all stage actors who had worked together in August Wilson's plays on Broadway. The show tackled gun violence, teen pregnancy, abortion, drug dealing in the Black community, and interracial relationships in a way that was real and unflinching and honest. In season 2, they filmed every single episode live television, every week. A Fox executive said Rock didn't feel live because the actors were so good, they never made one mistake. Like, they don't get enough props for what they did on that show, Rock. If y'all have never heard of it, if you've never watched it, try and find the old episodes. But Rock was no joke. It was such a good show. Now, here's where it gets real. Charles S. Dutton spent the entire run of that show in a war with Fox writers, who were, as he described them, mostly white and insensitive to the Black experiences. He had a specific battle over an episode where Joey dates a white woman. Fox's initial version of the script had the family fully supporting it, leaning into that we are the world fantasy. Dutton refused. He said, and I quote, "TV always wants Black characters to say, oh, we are the world, let's all live together. That's not realistic." He rewrote the episode himself, and Fox hated it. Dutton later said that Fox washed their hands of Rock a long time ago. They weren't promoting it, they weren't investing into it, and their cancellation of the show was very good proof of that. Meanwhile, Fox was running Martin, which was wild, it was funny, and it was raw, but which critics pointed out was leaning into stereotypes in ways that Rock refused to on Fox. It seemed that Fox preferred buffoonery to complexity. They pushed Martin, they let Rock disappear. Both things can be true. Black shows can be great, networks can actively choose which version of Blackness to celebrate and which ones to neglect. Then there was Living Single. Living Single premiered on Fox August 22nd, 1993. It was created by Yvette Lee Browser, the first Black woman ever to create, executive produce, and write a primetime sitcom. She drew from her personal experiences and her circle of friends to build a show about 6 young Black professionals, 4 women and 2 men, living and loving and building careers in Brooklyn, New York. Khadijah James, played by Queen Latifah, was a magazine editor and entrepreneur. Maxine Shaw, played by Erica Alexander, was a corporate attorney. They were not caricatures. These were aspirational, 3-dimensional, brilliant Black women who were funny and flawed and fully human. So now here's where this story takes a turn, okay?
They definitely stole that.
And
That whole concept.
well, Queen Latifah did come out recently and say that the guy that was head of, the
CBS
creative and NBC at that time, and he said, I like that show. Somebody asked him on a talk show if you could have any show that's on TV right now, which one would have been? And he's like, Living Single. He said,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then all of a sudden, Friends was on.
Living Single premiered in August of 1993. 13 months later, NBC debuted a new show called Friends, where 6 young adults who so happen to live in New York City were sharing an adjacent apartment and navigating careers and relationships and love. Does that sound familiar to y'all? It should, because the former NBC president, Warren Littlefield, literally admitted on record that he wished he had bought Living Single for his network. David Schwimmer of Friends acknowledged on record that it's likely that NBC was encouraged to greenlight Friends after seeing the success of Living Single.
Here's the story I know. I know that Warren Littlefield, who was the president of NBC at the time, was asked if there was any show you wish you had bought this season, what would it have been? And it would have been Living Single. That's the legend, at least what I've heard. Yeah. That he said, I wish I had bought Living Single. And the next year,
he did Friends.
Friends was on NBC.
So,
and we had the same production company. So it was Warner Brothers. One was on Fox, one was on NBC.
so we kind of think he saw Living Single and was like,
there was a formula.
Oh, we don't think. We know. I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, and it wouldn't be the first time people see something and then say, if I just do this here, I'll be just as successful, and even more so.
Yeah.
Because, look at how they're going to support that and market it and promote it. Totally different from what
the most purest form you find
I
cut you off, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
You find a template or you find a formula, and the formula worked.
yeah.
And I don't think the formula had been, maybe you could say Golden Girls because it was 4 women, but 4 women, 2 men. In their case, they had 3 and 3, and the formula worked, and so, boom.
Living Single creator Yvette Lee Bowser said it plainly herself. A lot of us in our art, our voices, were used to build networks and then disposed of. Here's the difference between those two shows.
All right, y'all, let's talk. So with the announcement that Erica Alexander and Kim Coles are doing a rewatch podcast of Living Single, where they'll not only talk about the episodes, but also give us some behind the scenes tea, they're obviously on a press run right now promoting the podcast, and the Friends stuff come up. And some people in the comments are asking, why do they keep bringing up Friends, and why is there always a comparison between the shows? But listen, there wouldn't be a Friends without Living Single, and I love both shows, and even back then, I noticed the parallel between the shows and between the characters. Back then, I thought, well, maybe this is just the version of this, but I still watched them both. Living Single premiered on Fox in 1993, and at the time, the president of NBC was asked if he could pick any show from any network, what show he wished he would have bought. He said Living Single. So a year later, in 1994, Friends premiered on NBC. Slightly different, strong similarities. And the frustration the Living Single cast has is that Friends is, for all intents and purposes, a copy and paste Anglo-Saxon version of their show. And I'm sure this wouldn't have been an issue if they were getting treated equally or better, since their show was out first than the Friends cast. The Friends cast filmed their show in a main studio, whereas the Living Single cast was on like a backlot. There were big pay differences between the shows. Friends cast obviously got paid more than the Living Single cast. And the Living Single cast would go to the execs like, hey, why are we getting treated like second-class citizens when their show is a copy and paste version of our show, but they're getting all the opportunities and all the money? Oh, and not to mention, T.C. Carson was essentially let go from Living Single because he was kind of the mouthpiece for the cast when they would have issues with what was going on in their treatment in comparison to Friends. He was the one who was talking in the meetings when they would go to meet with the execs. So they let him go because they were like, look, well, you're clearly the leader here, so if we cut you out, there won't be any complaints. But they were wrong because everybody felt like that. And it's very unfortunate, but we can attribute the treatment they got back then was really based all in race. Because back then, I feel like a lot of the TV execs didn't believe in black sitcoms and black shows. That's why they never really got the push that their white counterpart shows got. And that's why this is the perfect example. And I remember seeing a video a few years back that broke down and investigated that there were certain episodes of Living Single that were literally switched up and placed into Friends, like placement, character, script, just a bunch of different shit, and it was so interesting. And then I wondered, has there ever been any other Friends cast member that has said anything about Living Single and the comparison? Other than David Schwimmer, because we remember how that went when him and Erica Alexander kind of had a back and forth. But anyway, has there been any other cast member from Friends that mentioned Living Single?
Friends ran for 10 seasons, and they averaged 25 million viewers per week. It generated roughly $4 billion in revenue. It was nominated for 69 Primetime Emmy Awards. Living Single only nominated for NAACP Image Award in 1998, where it took home Outstanding Comedy Series and Outstanding Actress. NBC promoted Friends into a cultural phenomenon. Fox never ever gave Living Single the same promotional push. The show never cracked the top 50 in national Nielsen ratings, not because it wasn't good, because Fox wasn't investing in the show the same way NBC was investing in their version of the same concept. That tells you everything you need to know right there. So let's also not forget the Thursday night lineup at Fox that ran from 1994 to 1995. They had Martin going at 8 o'clock in the evening. Then they had Living Single coming on at 8:30. And then New York Undercover at 9. All of those shows were a hit in our household. We watched the shows. I was a huge fan of New York Undercover. 3 shows, all black. And New York Undercover was one of the first shows to feature Puerto Ricans. You had Michael DeLorenzo, and you had that female cop. She was Puerto Rican as well. So that was one of the first national shows to show Puerto Ricans. Those 3 shows were in that exact season, and the 3 highest rated shows amongst black television viewers in the entire country. Black audiences were showing up for Fox every single Thursday night. They were loyal, they were consistent, and they were exactly what Fox needed them to be. The problem? None of these 3 shows cracked the top 100 amongst white viewers. And on NBC on the same Thursday night, they had Friends, they had Seinfeld, and those were the top 10 for white audiences. But neither of them were in the top 80 for black viewers. American television was literally splitting into 2 separate universes, and the networks were about to make a choice on which universe that they wanted to live in. In the mid-90s, Fox was no longer a joke. They had cracked the code. They had the ratings, they had the attention, and in 1993, they had done the unthinkable. They stole the NFL from CBS, signing a major contract to broadcast the NFC, which made them a legitimate competitor to the big 3. Fox was now a real network. And the moment they became a real network, things started to change. Because here is the business reality. that nobody wants to say out loud, but everybody in the media world knows. Advertisers valued white audiences more. Not because white viewers watched more television, because they didn't. Black audiences were watching more television at the highest rates than any demographic group in the country. Advertisers preferred white affluent audiences because those eyeballs commanded higher advertising rates. A show that got 10 million black viewers was worthless to advertisers than a show that got 6 million white viewers in the 18 to 49 demographic. That was the economy. That was the system, and Fox, like every other network, had to operate within that system. Amanda Dane Lotz, writing in the sitcom Reader, documented it plainly. Fox switched its focus from black audiences to go after young male viewers, a demographic that advertisers valued more. And that's not an accusation. That's not speculation. That is fact, okay? It's been recorded. It's been in academic research. It's been documented by the people who study the industry. So what Fox basically started doing is that they started investing heavily in shows like Beverly Hills 90210, Melrose Place, Party of Five. Then in the late 90s, Ally McBeal. All of these shows had a predominantly white cast, and we watched them. I remember watching, 90210. That was one of my favorite shows in the 4th grade. Melrose Place. There was also Models Inc. as well. But it was weird because we went from like all these black shows that we were watching, a year or two before. And then by the time I'm in like 5th grade, it's like all these white shows. So all these shows had a predominantly white cast, all targeted as mainstream audiences, which in television industry language has historically been coded for white audiences that advertisers prefer to reach. Martin ended in 1997. There was drama at the end of the show with the co-star Tisha Campbell filing a lawsuit alleging set misconduct, which accelerated the finale. Living Single limped on for a 5th season that Fox ordered at a reduced episode count and aired in a delayed, disrespected fashion. Creator Yvette Bowser described watching the network pull back its promotional support and resources in real time. New York Undercover, which had been groundbreaking as one of the first primetime dramas to center around a black and Latino detective, ended in 1999. Fox didn't replace any of them with comparable black-led programming. And just like that, the Thursday night universe that black viewers had helped build at Fox was gone. So now that we broke down what Fox did, let's go ahead and get on the WB's neck real quick, okay? They kind of ran the same play as well. So I need y'all to understand this, okay? What happened at Fox was not a one-time event. It was a business model. And the proof of that is what happened at the WB, because they ran the same playbook just a few years later. The WB launched January 11th, 1995. It was a joint venture between Warner Brothers and the Tribune Company. It launched into a television landscape where Fox had already proven that targeting black audiences was a viable strategy for building a new network. The man who helped create Fox, Jamie Kellner, went over to run to the WB. He had seen the playbook up close and he knew exactly what to do. The WB launched the Wayans Brothers. That was their first show. Not Seventh Heaven, not Dawson's Creek, not Buffy the Vampire, but the Wayans Brothers. Remember, it was the same family, the Wayans family, that helped to launch Fox within Living Color. So instead of using Keenen Ivory Wayans, they went to his younger brothers this time to help launch the WB. Literally play by play. So the Wayans Brothers was a good show. We all watched it. We enjoyed it. A lot of good characters on there like Pop and things like that. From there, the WB built an entire identity, almost entirely of black sitcoms. They picked up Sister Sister with Tia and Tamara Mowry, and that vehicle had been canceled by ABC. They were initially on ABC, but when they moved to the WB, they started to thrive, okay? Then they brought in the Jamie Foxx show in 1996, where you could literally watch Jamie Foxx making the transition from sketch comedy, because remember, he was also on In Living Color. So it's funny that they took a lot of the actors from In Living Color that were black and gave them shows on the WB. Okay, so we watched him doing sketch comedy to now being a full-fledged actor on the WB on the Jamie Foxx show. They then launched the Steve Harvey show the same year, with Harvey playing a funk musician turned music teacher at an inner city Chicago school. And then they brought in The Parenthood with Robert Townsend, another look at a black middle-class family. And that was my show with Zaria and the brother Michael and things like that. That was a really, really good show. So just like Fox, these shows were delivered to Black audiences, and Black audiences were tuning in. The WB was getting traction, and the formula was working exactly the way it had worked for Fox just a few years before. TV critic Eric Deggans described it perfectly. Black people will watch culturally authentic shows that star Black people because back then and even now, there are not a lot of those kinds of shows. That's not a preference. It's a response to scarcity. These networks exploited that scarcity every single time. But here's the thing about the WB that I want y'all to pay attention to. In January of 1998, just 3 years into the network's existence, while still airing the Wayans brothers and Jamie Foxx and the Steve Harvey Show, they decided to debut a brand new show called Dawson's Creek. And the ratings were the highest in the network's history. Dawson's Creek was about 4 white teenagers on Cape Cod. And, they were going through all their little teenage angst and things like that. It starred Katie Holmes, and a lot of people really loved Dawson's Creek. I didn't get into it. That wasn't my show, but I know a lot of people really liked it. That show helped to launch the career of Katie Holmes and James Vanderbeek, rest in peace to him, and Joshua Jackson. It pulled in white teenage girls in the numbers that Black sitcoms did. So because of these two men being on the show, it was able to pull in the attention of white teenage girls that helped push the numbers even more. Just like Fox before, the WB looked at the numbers and made a choice. Over the next several years, the WB's identity shifted completely. They've developed Seventh Heaven, a family drama about a white reverend and his 7 children, which became one of the highest rated shows in the network's history, pulling 12.5 million viewers. In February 1999, they also brought in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and this was a cultural defining moment. They also added Felicity, Charmed, One Tree Hill, Gilmore Girls. They were all with predominantly white cast, all positioned as the identity of the WB. The Wayans brothers, they ended up canceling their show in 1999. The Jamie Foxx show ended in 2001. Steve Harvey's show ended in 2002. The WB didn't replace them with other, Black-led programming, other Black-led actors and actresses. Their prestige, because they had these high-rating white shows, made them just be like, okay, cool, we're done with the Black folks now. Y'all can go on back to where y'all came from. And they just only kept focusing on building up white production, white produced shows with white actors and things like that. So by 2002, the WB's value had grown to $1 billion, built on Black sitcoms, polished with white teen drama. And then the people who built it from the ground up, who built the foundation, were kicked to the curb. Peabody Award journalists said it clearly in 2023. As each of these networks became successful, they got whiter. The Black shows gave way to that 70s show, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, The OC, Dawson's Creek, Veronica Mars, and all the Black shows from that era. All of them were marketed exclusively to Black audiences in a way that previous crossover hits like The Jeffersons, Cosby Show, and Fresh Prince of Bel-Air were not. Which means even when these networks were airing Black shows, they weren't trying to build crossover audiences for them. They were simply trying to contain them and monetize them and eventually replace them. So another network that people tend to forget about is the UPN, okay? So we got to talk about them if we're going to talk about Fox and the WB. The UPN was the one who brought in a lot of other Black shows as well. On UPN, you could watch Moesha, The Parkers, Girlfriends, Half and Half, One on Monday nights. That was a Black TV night, okay? They had teen shows, college life, Black friendships, Black women, Black coming of age stories. The UPN became the last safe space for Black sitcoms on broadcast television, while the WB was slowly pivoting and, leaning more towards white television. The UPN said, fine, we'll just take that audience, and they did. But here's where it got messy. While the UPN was holding it down with their Black programming, the WB was going a completely different direction. Now, here's the issue that a lot of folks don't mention, is that even though there was a lot of Black shows left on UPN, a lot of these shows were underfunded, okay? They weren't given the same budgets as a lot of the white shows on television. They were considered second-tier television. They didn't get the marketing budgets, they didn't get the crossover promotions, and they didn't get pushed to mainstream audiences like a lot of the white shows. They were kept in a box and marketed exclusively to Black viewers. They were kept contained. Now, the difference between the WB and UPN is that the WB was using these Black shows to create a crossover. UPN was building their shows to hold Black audiences in one place. So they didn't necessarily want to start bringing on white TV shows, but they also were not really promoting these Black shows or putting money into their budgets either. So then what ended up happening is that they decided to do a merger. In 2006, UPN merges with the WB and they create the new CW. Okay? This is where everything changed overnight. Because instead of merging the audiences, they chose one audience. And let's be real, they were not going to choose the audience from Moesha or Girlfriends or the Parkers. They chose the WB's white audience. And just like that, all the UPN Black shows were gone. Not solely phased out, not transitioned properly, not given final cuts, literally canceled. We didn't know what happened. It's like when Judy went upstairs and just never came back down. It was like that. There was no ending. There was no sense of finality with these shows, which hurt us as children because we didn't know what was going on. We just found out the show was canceled and that's it. Go watch this new white show called Dawson's Creek, so it's a very frustrating time. And the sad part is that the people who worked on these shows, they said the same thing. The announcement came out of nowhere. There was no warning, no real explanation. Somebody just came in one day and said, hey, everybody's been fired. Go home. This production is not over. UPN built the loyalty with Black viewers and then handed that loyalty over to a network that didn't prioritize them. So when you zoom out, you see the big picture. UPN was no different than any of these other networks. They were just as bad as Fox and the WB. They were just the final cycle. Fox used Black culture to launch, the WB used Black sitcoms to stabilize, and UPN used Black audiences to survive. And once the survival turned to success, all of those Black shows became expandable. So now let's talk about what got left behind and who actually paid the price for all this foolishness that went on in the late 90s and early 2000s. The real world impact of what this pattern created is that when Fox started pulling away from Black programming in the late 90s, and when the WB and UPN followed suit in the 2000s, Black audiences didn't just disappear. They went somewhere else. And where they went was cable, specifically BET, TV One, and eventually streaming platforms. The shows that they loved on Fox and the WB didn't come with them. Living Single wasn't given a proper ending. Regina got engaged and her wedding was never shown. She was just written out. The series finale was sloppily produced. Fox just threw something together and then literally the show was canceled the next day. The Wayans brothers ended without any type of ceremony. These shows did not get the iconic finales and send-offs like you see with the Seinfeld or Friends. There was no cultural event. There was no celebration. It was just, oh, the shows are canceled. It was just silence. So Black creators and actors who had built their career on these platforms, they had to find their way to navigate the television landscape that was suddenly less interested in them. The same industry that had courted Keenen Ivory Wayans and hired Yvette Lee Bowser and given Jamie Foxx, a starring vehicle and built a network around the Steve Harvey show. These same industries turned around and offered these same creators fewer opportunities, then decided to go mainstream. During the golden era of Black television on Fox and the WB, those shows were almost never recognized by mainstream award bodies. Living Single nominations were exclusively at the NAACP Image Awards. In Living Color won 1 Emmy in its first season, then was largely ignored. Meanwhile, Seinfeld and Frasier and Friends were sweeping every major award every single year. The Peabody Awards, which we like to think of as honoring television excellence, failed to recognize any of the iconic Black sitcoms of that era. They said to themselves in 2023, they honored those shows for Black History Month, acknowledging that Frasier, Mad About You, Roseanne, Seinfeld had all won Peabodys, while Living Single, Martin and Sister Sister never did. So not only were these shows being pushed out of prime time, they were being denied the critical recognition that would have cemented their legacy and given them longevity. And the aftermath of all of this drama is something that we're still living with today. When Fox and the WB pivoted away from Black-led programming in the late 90s and the early 2000s, the number of Black-centered stories on primetime broadcast television dropped dramatically. In the early 2000s, television landscape was almost unrecognizable compared to what Fox Thursday night looked like back in 1994. Black family sitcoms, which had been the staple of American television through the Cosby Show era and via Fox and the WB era, virtually disappeared from primetime. And when they came back, it was often in the form of reality television, which brought a whole different set of problems in terms of how Black people were being represented. Black audiences who had been built up and then abandoned by Fox and the WB had to migrate. BET existed, but it had its own complicated relationship with quality programming during that period. UPN held on for a little while and became the last refuge for Black sitcoms, but as always, it was underfunded and underpowered, and eventually merged itself out of existence. Black audiences had been loyal enough to watch 3 consecutive hours of Black television every Thursday night on Fox, was now fragmented, scattered across cable and streaming, with no single destination, no major network actively courting them. And it wasn't until Scandal and How to Get Away with Murder and Empire arrived in the 2010s that broadcast networks rediscovered something they had always known. Black audiences are powerful, loyal, and generative. Empire, their viewership estimated to be around 60% Black, was competing with and dominating in primetime ratings in a way that would have been impossible just a decade before. But here's the thing. By that point, Black audiences had to be rediscovered. They had to be recorded because these same networks that had built themselves on Black culture and spent a decade and a half treating these audiences as an afterthought started again. Shonda Rhimes became a force at ABC and built an empire of Black-led dramas. But then she eventually left for Netflix, where she had more creative freedom and more resources. Issa Rae built Insecure on HBO. Danny Glover built Atlanta on FX. The most critical acclaimed Black storytelling in the last decade has largely happened on cable and streaming, not on broadcast network that originally claimed to be the home of Black television. So that tells you everything you need to know. So Tisippers, when we look back at the 90s and early 2000s and say that that was a golden era of Black television, I want y'all to understand that there's something underneath that nostalgia. While it felt good and it was fun, it brings back a lot of memories, we were also being shortchanged. Fox needed to become legitimate, and Black culture made it legitimate. The WB needed to survive, and its first few years, the Black sitcoms kept it alive. And once those networks took off, once they had the ratings and the advertisers and the credibility, the cultural cachet, the very community that had built them up was slowly and quietly pushed out the picture. Yvette Browser said it directly. We were used to build these networks, then disposed of. Charles S. Dutton said that the cancellation of his quality show was proof that the quality in television is on reserve for white people. Eric Deggans, a longtime TV critic, documented the strategy in plain language. It was a programming strategy, not a commitment strategy. So when we talk about Fox, when we talk about the WB, and when we talk about UPN, I don't want y'all to look at it like, oh, that's just old TV history, because the truth is the same exact pattern is happening right now. Let's talk about TikTok. When TikTok first blew up in America, who was leading it? It was Black content creators, Black dances, Black slang, Black skits, trends. Same thing with YouTube, okay?
Every single day, Black creators put things into the universe that go viral and become the biggest thing in the world, but time and time again, they don't receive their just due. On TikTok specifically, most of the popular dances, like the Renegade, have come from young Black creators on smaller apps like Dubsmash, Funimate, and Triller. The popular teens on TikTok see these dances when they're already gaining traction underground, bring it to their audience, and make it mainstream while taking all the credit. Jalea choreographed a dance to K-Camp's song Lottery, and in September of 2019, she posted it to Instagram and Funimate. A month later, a user by the name of Global Jones brought it to TikTok, changing up some of the moves at the end, and the dance ended up spreading like crazy.
Black people helped to build YouTube and TikTok culture, but who started getting picked up were the white influencers. They were getting huge brand deals, sponsorships, millions of followers, media coverage, while the original creators of the dances or, whatever trend, they were getting overlooked or not getting credited at all. Doesn't that sound familiar to y'all? It's the same playbook every time. Build up the platform with Black creativity and then replace the faces of the platform once the money shows up. Now let's talk about Tubi really quick, because Tubi is the new one. And a lot of people don't want to have this conversation. And I like Tubi. Okay, I do watch Tubi. But Tubi blew up off of what? low-budget urban films, Black-led content, hood dramas, indie Black films, and for a long time, Tubi became the go-to space for Black creators who weren't getting opportunities in Hollywood. And again, Black audiences showed up, we watched, we supported, we made Tubi relevant.
One of the guys that was over at partnerships at TikTok, a Black dude, he just went over to Tubi. Pause for a second. Let me give the Tubi story real quick. So Tubi, everybody knows what Tubi is, especially Black culture. So you know all those movies that were going on Tubi? Those movies that were going on Tubi had a requirement, a minimum budget requirement to be on the platform. So let's say, hey, if I wanted to get my movie on Tubi, the minimum budget that your movie has to be was maybe $50K, $25,000. Okay. And then you can get your movie put on Tubi. Black people did that for years and years and years, right? Okay. Then Tubi just did a rebrand. It did a brand new rebrand. And then guess what happened? They raised the amount of money that your production has to be to put a movie on Tubi. So now your production, the budget of your movie has to be $500,000.
Oh, wow.
$1 million to get on Tubi. So now Black people built up Tubi, and now you got to shoot better content to put your movies on Tubi. But here's the part. The guy that went over to Tubi, he just got over there from TikTok, Black dude. Guess what he just did? He did a deal with Mr. Beast.
But now we're starting to see a shift, okay? We're starting to see a lot more non-Black production. More mainstream content is coming to Tubi. Bigger studio influences are slowly creeping in. The same people who helped to build the platform are starting to feel pushed aside. So we've seen this time and time again with Fox, the WB, UPN, and now TikTok, Tubi, and YouTube. Different platforms, different decades, same exact strategy. Black culture is always the spark, always the blueprint, and always the thing that makes stuff feel real. But once it becomes profitable, that's when the shift happens. That's when the faces change, and that's when the original creators get pushed out of the spotlight that they themselves created. So Tisippers, I'm going to go ahead and leave the conversation up to y'all. After hearing all of this about what happened in the 90s and 2000s with Fox, the WB, and UPN, now seeing the same thing playing out in modern day. So how do you feel about all this? So let's go ahead and get the discussion popping. I definitely look forward to reading y'all's comments down below. So make sure you guys like the video. Feel free to share the video. And most importantly, make sure you still subscribe to the channel. And I'll talk to y'all later. Deuces.
Want the latest news in the streets? Join us and tune in for the tea. Breaking news with integrity. So tell your friends and your family. It's the Lovelyti TV show, bringing you good tea and good vibes. It's the Lovelyti TV show. Be sure to share, like, and subscribe.